I think with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brian Miller. He's a professor at Adhd University, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's nice to be here. Let me start out, just give a little bit of history of myself, my own experience, and I've got over 20 years experience as a school psychologist, and then 15 years of that were more dealing with low incidence populations, like multiple disabilities and autism spectrum disorders, and different low incidence populations. The last 9 years, I've been focused primarily on preschool and deaf, hard of hearing as a school psychologist. And then in addition, I've been working full-time at Gallaudet University in the school psychology program there, training school psychologists. And the last 9 years, my preference as a school psychologist, like through just my different years, is I've really been more interested in getting in there on the front end and working with early intervention and young preschool children and families. And so I've been doing that. I still do that part-time in Pennsylvania, and then I live in Maryland and I teach in Washington, okay? So, and I'm here in Illinois. And I do a little work with Mississippi too, but anyway. So I'm a school psychologist first, and then a professor second, and a presenter third, okay? So I'm not, so let's keep it pretty relaxed here as a presentation, okay? Otherwise it'll make myself nervous, and okay? So feel free if we want to make it interactive or you've got some questions, interrupt me, okay? And I'm not going to stand up here and like lecture for 5 hours, okay? I'm going to just go over some more of the standard lecture information and research in the field and things related to behavioral, emotional, social characteristics of deaf, hard of hearing kids, and then try to apply some of that stuff to some activities later on in the morning and then also in the afternoon. Okay? All right, let's get started. Oh, and I got a little, before we get started, I got a little information on what the group kind of looks like. So how any school psychologists in the group? Okay, social workers, speech language therapists, teachers, okay. Any other groups that are not? Counselors, okay. Audiologists. Case manager, right. All right, good, nice mixture. Okay, get started here. I apologize that this isn't bigger, okay? Sometimes the font I use is pretty small, so you may want to look down at your handout in the same. But just, read through it real fast. So, I don't think this isn't anything new to all of you, that doing any type of assessment of a deaf, hard of hearing child is you really need to pay close attention to the family makeup, the language in the family, the language of the child, specific cultural values and beliefs. Really need to look at that very, very carefully with deaf, hard of hearing kids, like other culturally and linguistically diverse kids. The next bullet here, where looking at behavioral assessment, or behavioral and emotional assessment, we really need to follow a lot of the same types of procedures that we'll use for like intellectual and academic assessment. By that I mean like academic and intellectual assessment. That's kind of like my research areas of interest, like for the last 9 years. I'm really interested in some of the newer intelligence theories that are out there that look at multiple intelligences, not just looking at, definitely not just verbal intelligence where you're measuring verbal English skills, but looking at a wide variety of abilities with deaf, hard of hearing kids. Like Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory, if any of you are familiar with that, that's like the basis for a lot of the new intelligence tests. So that's one of my research areas of focus. Another area of focus for me is in the academic area, how you can adapt like curriculum-based measurement and curriculum-based assessment to better monitor progress of kids by more frequent assessment. Okay, so that's something, another area of research interest of mine. They've, in the hearing population, been doing it for 20 years, And then recently, in the last 5 years or so, there have been more and more deaf, hard of hearing programs in schools that have been trying to adapt some of those CBA, CBM, and applying it to deaf, hard of hearing kids. And the reason for that is to get kids thinking. If you're, if you're instructing on reading every day and then assessing it more frequently, then kids are thinking about reading more frequently and becoming better readers, okay? So looking at newer intelligence theories, looking at ways to adapt some of the academic assessments and adding new informal curriculum-based academic assessment, those have been two of my research areas of interest. Now, the behavioral area really hasn't been my research area of interest, but it's my teaching area of interest. I teach the behavior assessment course at Gallaudet, teach the behavior interventions course, okay? This area is a little bit further behind as far as finding good ways to adapt assessment and intervention for deaf kids. It's a little bit behind compared to like the cognitive area and the academic area. But what we do in the behavior assessment class is similar to what we do in our intelligence assessment and academic assessment classes, where we look at what measures are there out there, where there have been special group studies, you know, where we looked at, is this test valid to be used for deaf, hard of hearing kids? What's out there looking at more informal ways to assess behavioral and emotional improvement, okay? Almost like looking at what's some of the curriculum-based, like social skills curriculums and other types of behavioral and emotional curriculums, how have they been used and applied for deaf, hard of hearing kids? So it's almost like looking at applying that RTI, response to intervention approach, from the academic area, then kind of expanding it to the behavioral area, okay? So we look at that in my classes, all right? But there's not as much, okay? There's, I think, it's still a little bit further behind, like with the research. Now, one of my colleagues at Gallaudet, Tanya Thomas Presswood, she's also a school psychology professor there, she's written a good book about how to apply educational approaches for assessment and intervention. Yeah, is there a question?
Is assessment done at school and the home, or just the behavioral assessment?
Well, hopefully, they're something that can be integrated in the school, definitely, but then also having the parents being part of that. You know, like, and we're talking in terms of like behavioral assessment, best practices there. I mean, it discusses multiple informants, multiple sources of information, multiple environments, okay? So hopefully you're going to have the parents involved with the behavior assessment, looking at like what the strengths and needs are from the home environment, okay? And that's kind of what, like that first resource that's described here talks about ways too, being very sensitive to the unique nature of the home environment and how to appropriately assess and intervene with culturally-linguistically diverse kids. Yeah. So kind of beyond the school. Go ahead.
I guess the mixture of the culture and the language of deaf children, and a lot of the children I see, they are signing, reading, and writing English, and the family is speaking another language. And eventually the child may eventually say to the family, I don't understand the language that you're speaking, and I don't understand it when you write it. So you have a culture that the child is not quite so strong in because they're really acclimating to English culture through school, and their language is different from the parents. So
Yeah.
that adds some sense of, you know,
Yeah.
culture.
Multiple cultures, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the reason that I bring up this, and whenever I talked about behavior assessment before, I talk about it from a broad perspective. Like, my students know I'm not just talking about standardized testing. I mean, that can be part of it, like through rating scales and things, but then I'm also talking about good background information, the observation, informal methods of monitoring behavioral progress. That should be part of an overall, like, behavioral assessment. Much the same way that's part of, like, any academic or learning assessment. Okay? So that's one good resource, and then another one more specifically related to behavioral and emotional assessment. That's the book we use, the Camphouse and Frick, Child and Adolescent Assessment of Child and Adolescent Personality and Behavior. It talks about using, again, those multiple sources of information and looking and assessing in multiple environments in order to get a good comprehensive view of strengths and needs. It's the beeping happening. Yeah, yeah. I don't know where. It's not me, is it?
No.
Good.
Can you say the name of that book again for a second?
Yeah, it's Child and Adolescent Personality and Behavior. I think. Yeah, I don't think it has the assessment part in, but it's an assessment book. One thing that I don't have with my handout here, and I promise I will get it to you, is like all the references. Okay, completely slipped my mind. You'll probably see if you go to the end, it's like, where are all the references? But I promise I will get that. Okay, get that and like forward that. All right. So anyway, that's like a popular school psychology book in the field that really looks at, again, best practices in assessment. It's general, for hearing children, but definitely some of those best practices things apply to with deaf, hard of hearing kids. And again, definitely looking at the family and culture and and early language and how that impacts the child's strengths and needs. So now, getting into the meat of the presentation, we're discussing about what would be good things to think about, to discuss, and this is like one of the big areas that I know we struggle with in the school psychology program when we're talking about how do we assess and separate like emotional disturbance, what are the characteristics of that, separate that from what could be related to like deaf cognition or just environmental factors, okay? So for me, it makes this very, very important. Like with special ed evals, you need to rule out, have these exclusionary factors, rule out the effects of certain variables before you're going to diagnose emotional disturbance. And so kind of like my philosophy is that we need to carefully look at those behavior characteristics that could be related to just deaf cognition, how the brains develop and maybe are different with deaf and hard of hearing kids. And then also how that environment, like late access to language mismatches, a lot of things related to the family environment, how that may impact the behavioral and emotional characteristics of the kids, okay? So for me, it means that there's a lot more needed to do a lot more informal assessment, a lot more like in-depth looking at the background information, a lot more assessment of how they respond to interventions, support plans, how they respond to different things over time. And then it's only through that process that then you can say, all right, well, yeah, we think this may have been related to the deaf cognition, but we've changed some things to try to make it fit with the kid better. This may have been related to the environment, but we've changed some things, added some different interventions, and so now we're able to like rule that out and say, all right, lack of response to those types of interventions, and the kid still has more significant behavioral and emotional needs, okay? So we're supposed to do that anyway with all different special ed evals, right? But I think it's really important in these two types of areas for deaf, hard of hearing kids. So basically what I said before relates to, and the importance of you guys really expanding your work on with the response to intervention, being able to try different things and look at how kids respond to that in the behavioral and emotional area is going to be very important. The RTI, I mean, that's something where, I mean, we think about it, it relates to like the tier process to, you know, try different academic interventions before ruling like learning disabilities or behavioral disorders or emotional disorders with the hearing population. And we discuss this a lot at Gallaudet. I mean, there's different people that say, well, RTI, that doesn't apply to deaf kids because they already have IEPs, you know, so it doesn't, we're not going to be evaluating the response to different things in regular education because they already have IEPs. But my philosophy is, and there's some people there's research out there that talks about the value of it to reduce the need for more restrictive placements, okay? That really connects with behavioral and emotional disorders, right? I mean, if you've got the kids that are in their regular program or in the residential school, and if you're not implementing like the FBAs and the BIPs and whatever you call them, BSPs, support plans, if you're not implementing those, then the kid could then move to, you know, a more restrictive placement that just focuses on on emotional and behavior disorders. I also think it has value, that perspective, RTI perspective, has value in the learning area too, in order to encourage, continue to encourage good teaching and frequency of assessment, so that kids don't end up getting diagnosed with additional learning problems or learning disabilities. Okay, I think there's a lot that can be done in the regular deaf hard of hearing programs and regular residential schools that can, you know, work on implementing a lot of interventions so that additional special ed diagnoses don't need to be made. Okay, does that make sense? So in the academic area, but then really here our focus today is really on that behavioral and emotional. You gonna say?
I'm going to address what the current research is talking about when you talk about evidence-based and whether or not children who are deaf or hard of hearing were even included in the process, let alone the norming process, let alone the results of the research, and how to compare deaf and hard of hearing children to instruments that have no sensitivity to those specific issues of deaf and hard of hearing children.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the actual special ed eval process or just more the RTI process? Yes.
Or going with what you were saying with RTI.
Yes, yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, yeah. But I think there's still a lot that needs to be done. You know, trying out a lot more different assessment programs, intervention programs, and looking at how they apply to deaf, hard of hearing kids. I have some examples here today that are just only examples, you know, in some of the research that's out there, but it's still new.
Even some of the social skills programs that are out there that are evidence-based still are so culturally and linguistically weighted that to apply them still requires modifications that are so significant. Are you even using then the curriculum as it was designed, or are you back to making your own? So,
well, it's
go through, that would be good to.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, what I view is we discuss this all the time in a behavior assessment interventions class, like how much do you need to adapt it? And it kind of becomes kind of like a mixture sometimes. It's like, yes, we're using this original framework, but we're going to have to adapt this and this and this, and use pictures here instead of like the language interventions that are here, because depending on the group and the kids, you're not going to be able to use it and apply it. So, so what I always say is, like, whenever we're doing evaluations, whether it's assessments or intervention programs, you're going to have to say, all right, I used this, but this I adapted it this way, and you know, then that's. So you're not going to talk about using it maybe in a standardized way, but you're going to say that, you know, that I needed to adapt it. And luckily, if we can find some research that's showing some programs, like the PATHS program, you guys know that? PATHS, all right? Now that has a lot of application to deaf, hard of hearing. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a lot just as an example. Go ahead.
ISRC has the PATHS curriculum in our resource library.
Okay.
Illinois School for the Deaf was using it for a while.
Okay, good, good.
And I see what you're talking about often in schools is they'll adapt the test, and they'll say they've adapted the test at the meeting, but then instead of just saying the strengths and weaknesses, they'll actually use the number to score.
Yeah.
I know that drives me crazy.
I know, and yeah. And sometimes you can use numbers, but you're always going to have to qualify that. That's what we talk about all the time at Gallaudet. You're going to have to just say, well, this number, but how much can this number be, be accurate? Now, with some of the measures, and I'll get into this just in a couple slides, but you can go over it now. Like in the behavioral assessment areas, like adaptive behavior measures. They're probably like the best as far as they've, most of them have special group studies. Like they're small, on small numbers of students, but like the Vineland and the ABOS, Adaptive Behavior Assessment System, and the Scales of Independent Behavior. They've all had special group studies, to show that it's okay to use, that all those measures usually have the communication scores are lower, which the publishers say, they're lower because of possible communication delays and late access to language. But overall, you can use these measures to get a good barometer from a standardized test on where the kids' present levels are. Okay, so adaptive behavior measures are kind of in the forefront. Another one is, if you heard of the BRIEF, the behavior rating inventory of executive functioning, which we're going to get into executive functioning a lot here. That's also had like special group studies with deaf, hard of hearing. I guess I'm sorry.
I was changing it a little bit, but it has to do with your slide. I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit what you meant by deaf cognitive biological influences.
Yes, I'm going to expand on it. Yeah, and
Will it come up later?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, it will. And it's kind of the way, and hopefully it'll make some sense, because I actually kind of separated like attention from some of the other social behavior emotional, because the attentional system seems to be something that can be more related.
Sorry. She's having a hard time hearing you, and this one is not working right here.
Oh, okay.
We're very good.
It's off.
Oh, that's fine. Good. That makes me relax.
I haven't used this before. There it goes. Okay.
Is it working?
Should be on.
Working better now?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
There you go. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, there's more newer research like for that attentional area, that it's kind of like how the brain develops with deaf kids and their attentional system. But that the other area related to some of like the delays in maybe executive functioning or theory of mind. Have you been hearing more about that? Like kids getting a good social and emotional development through theory of mind. That seems to be more environmentally. So we need to pay attention to both. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Like it's some of what may be the environment, because the kid hasn't been exposed, to a lot. Therefore, the theory of mind gets delayed, or just how that deaf brain may be different, like with the attentional system. Okay. Yeah. So we'll get into that. That's good. It's good. You guys are this smart group. You were way ahead of me. Okay. So it's what we've been saying, and that's like just a good quote, just what we've been saying with different standardized tests can be valuable, and we need to start with that, but then we're going to definitely need to look at how they're interpreted in a fair way, keeping in mind the kids' environment and the effects of deafness on their development. Now.
If you could just adjust that a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Now, yeah, I'm sorry. It's kind of like cut off there. Sorry. So again, this is just what we were discussing. So you guys were like reading my mind, you know. So we're like, yeah, this is just what we were just discussing about before. Looking in terms of assessment specifically with deaf, hard of hearing kids, make cautious test adaptation, and it also, it's the same thing with cognitive and academic assessment, which I was talking about. I think the use of response to intervention and informal assessment and progress monitoring, you know, of response to like daily instruction. I think it's more important with deaf, hard of hearing kids because of the lack of good standardized tools to use with deaf, hard of hearing kids. Okay, so that's my philosophy. So we need to place a greater emphasis and use more good informal assessment, meaning like looking at background information and observations and behavioral and response to behavioral interventions, that kind of thing. And then also some of the standardized tests that maybe have a good special group study that show they can be used for deaf, maybe don't need to be adapted so much. Yes?
The assessments you're talking about, are any of them academic, or are they all the social assessments, emotional assessments? Academic meaning math, reading, those kind of tests that we put the kids through.
Yeah, not a lot of the standardized, I don't know a lot of the standardized academic assessments that have had a lot of like special group studies. Now the cognitive assessments, okay, where you're looking at how they learn and strengths and weaknesses and how they learn. Most of the new cognitive assessments, like I said before, are based on more of like a multiple intelligences theory, right? So you're going to be administering a variety of administering tests in a variety of areas. You're going to look at verbal English, but kind of keep that over here separate, and say, all right, that's where they are with their language development in verbal English, and then maybe also ASL. But then you're also going to be trying to assess a lot of other areas that we know now are part of intelligence, like visual processing and visual memory and problem solving visually and processing speed visually, a lot of different things that now the new tests that are coming out they're trying to separate how do we measure strengths and weaknesses with abilities that are all separate from the language part, okay, that require less adaptation for language, okay? So that's, and they also, the new ones have special group studies too, to look at which subtests are the best to give for deaf, hard of hearing kids, which have the less language demands, which will give you a full picture of a kid's abilities. Okay, so that's more in that cognitive area. There's been a lot more done there. What are you going to say?
So who's responsible for administering these assessments?
School psychologist. Sometimes in the preschool area, there's different people, like the developmental tests, other special educators, developmental evaluators. Okay. That's more in that cognitive area. Now, the academic tests, I think the reason there's not a lot of special group studies and adaptations for those because you're measuring like reading, writing, math. You know, like you're not measuring as wide a variety of like cognitive abilities as whenever you're doing cognitive testing, where you can where you're measuring a lot of things, trying to separate the English language element from it. You know, and can still do that. If you have a lot of visual subtests, okay? So the academic area, I mean, we still use them, right? I mean, and you guys use them. Like, which ones do you use? Do you use Woodcock-Johnson? Do you use Kaufman, Test of Educational Achievement? To me, what I've seen is, like, when I'm part of, like, my National Association of School Psychologists, their deaf, hard of hearing interest group on children and families, which Linda's part of that, too. We discuss a lot of that there, like kind of like, and it becomes more of like a practitioner issue, kind of like which subtests can you administer with less adaptation, with less language demands for the actual instructions. So we kind of look at there's different preferences, what different school psychologists and other educators like to use for academic assessments, but not so much of the special group studies there. But in the cognitive area, yes. The behavioral area, like I said before, we've got the adaptive behavioral scales and the brief, like scales of executive functioning, and some special group studies on the Connors too, like on the Connors attention and behavior rating scales. Okay, so a little bit on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. using like the Vineland for adaptive behavior assessment, oftentimes, there's a big portion of that where you're asking the parent to reflect on their assessment of their children's development. And if the parent doesn't even have a grasp of sign language or doesn't have really adequate communication with their child, trying to get a sense of really how well they can assess their child often seems like you're just running circles. And then you've got the teacher version, but I'm just wondering if you're going to further thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's sad but true. It kind of talks about how that environmental impact, can really, it's going to impact a lot of things, not only the kids' present levels, but then also even just, the accuracy of assessing their levels, like from the parents. And when you think about it, those adaptive behavior measures were really developed for, like, the parent should be the best informant. They should be the one, and in some states, like in Mississippi, where I do some consultation with RTI stuff down there, and I saw it written into their state regulations, like that you must give the parent, and you must only use the parent one, and like maybe you can give the teacher one, but you pay primary attention to the parent one. And I had to explain to them, like, sometimes, especially with culturally linguistically diverse populations, and if there's a real, language and communication mismatch in the home, that they're not the best informants, because a lot of times that has caused the delay, so you're really getting a much more accurate picture. So thank goodness for teacher and educator rating scales, like for adaptive behavior and other things. So you're right. It's sad but true. But you basically just have to weight that in your assessment. Looking at how much of a late access to language was there, how little can they communicate, or how much they can communicate, and make a judgment on. You can still use that as qualitative assessment, but maybe then not use the numbers as much as you would use some of the educational assessments.
It's difficult though when you have the teacher assessment and the parent assessment, and they are not even really the same world. You've got to discuss that in your summary of the data. That's tricky. And basically, there's different, like that Camp House and Frick book. It talks about different ways how you can weigh different things, from a variety of perspectives. And there's no one answer, but a lot of times you'll say you can maybe say it in a kind and gentle way. That's like, well, this area may be a little harder for you to accurately assess, because of the communication difficulties in the home environment, and then so we're going to need to weigh this educational area as equal. But yeah, you can present all of the stuff and then just try to and then kind of weigh it in a sensitive way. Was there another question back? Or?
I was just going to make a comment that actually the difference in those numbers could end up being a blessing, in that the parent may finally understand.
Right.
We need to do something there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something else for his child, and look at how, and then I deal with that right now with the student.
Yeah.
It's such a difference in what goes on at home and the parent just doesn't yet understood that.
Right.
And they will, I think she will, it's coming along, but it's hard to let go of, oh, I need to learn this time. Yeah.
You're right, though. That's what I view it as. It could be a tool to like to create like a light bulb moment, like, why can't I answer these? Or, or why don't I, or why,
Why can my child not do these?
Right, not doing these things here, but yet they're doing them there. You're right. Yeah, so it can be very valuable even if you're not going to be able to use those numbers. And with the research on adaptive behavior has kind of said like the opposite, where parents normally, like in the hearing population, they rate them pretty high, over rate. and then the educational assessments, I really like those for the opposite reason, because they're more realistic and a lot of times more accurate sometimes. So you need to blend the two and say, oh yeah, parents think they're doing all these things, but in the educational setting they're not doing as much. But you're right, the same thing, you gotta, when the parents don't know, then you're gonna have to weigh that in the assessment. What was I gonna say about? With the measures too. The fact that they have the adaptive behavior measures, that they have special group studies, and they were planning this when they were developing those measures. They're planning, like, oh, we're going to get a small group of deaf hard of hearing kids. Sometimes you'll see more sensitive language. Oops, sorry. Wow. I will try not to do that again. Sometimes you'll see more sensitive language in those adaptive behavior measures. Like they'll say communicate instead of talk. You know what I mean? They're just more careful wording, which is nice to see. But other times you won't see that. And we'll still, like if you can make an easy adaptation in the question itself, then do it. You know, it's like parents and teachers will ask me, it's like, well, it says say, can I say sign? You know, yes. You know, we want to be able to see that communication area. You want to see, you know, what are the strengths of that child in any of their language modality, any communication modality. You want to, so if you can make some minor adjustments in that communication area to be able to get at everything the kid knows, like, well, he can say this, but he signs this, well, you want all that information. And as long as you document that in your reports, you know, you're covered. You need to say wherever, if there's adaptations made in some of the wordings, and then they say that you know, that you know, could impact some of the scores. But the good news is you're going to have a lot more than just standardized measures, right? In your overall report, looking at, you've got a wealth of information from daily classroom performance and observational assessment, lots of other stuff, so that you don't want to weigh too heavily on those scores from those standardized measures. Okay, and again, like since we're talking about it here, there's also, you really have to do just item by item things in a lot of the measures. Yet you have to be able to look at, oh, can I use that? Can I not use that? Because in some of the measures for autism spectrum disorders, I mean, you've got the verbal communication part, which just it's really hard for me to be able to like separate that and say that's part of autism spectrum. Whenever, no, that can be part of the overall deaf development. And then listening response, obviously. So some of those areas, what we basically do is we'll just kind of eliminate some of those subcategories. You know, if there's too many confounding variables, you know, so that you can't separate for what's deafness and what's an actual behavioral and emotional disorder, you can like eliminate those. But the good news is that the measures then also have a lot of things that you can use, you know, that you can still use. So you maybe eliminate some at the item level, eliminate some at the more category level, like verbal communication or listening response, and then use a whole bunch of other assessment data, right, other than standardized assessment to be able to make sure you still have an accurate picture. Let's see. All right. Now here's an example, just with ADHD. So, again, you know this, right? Like a diagnosis of ADHD. I mean, it can be it can be a difficult diagnosis because you're going to have to separate the behaviors that that could be related to the kid's individual development themselves. And so again, using like the standardized measures, I mean, do an item by item thing, and eliminate the ones that that are not, that wouldn't be appropriate, you know, for the deaf kid, that have more of like a listening response as part of the question, and just knowing that the deaf kid's visual system, you know, that we'll get into this, like some of the newer research on attention characteristics, that they can be more distracted by things going on because of the wider visual system. And then also some of the other areas, maybe due to just environmental factors influencing their self-control and influencing some of those behavioral things that they haven't learned because of a lack of good communication with parents, because language is so powerful, right, in how parents are going to teach their kids about behavioral, not only cognitive and academic things, but behavioral things, socialization, social language, self-control, so many things we'll get into. But anyway, so that's something that you know, but I wanted to kind of just focus on that to kind of transition into this next part here. So this is, we just started to talk about the attention characteristics in deaf and hard of hearing children. Again, this is the part that I put more in that biological deaf cognitive category, okay? Just kind of like how that deaf brain develops. And there's still a lot that we don't know, but there's more and more research that's coming out every year, okay, on not only how just brains develop like with hearing kids, but then also how brains develop with deaf and hard of hearing kids. So I listed some newer information here. And we need to, the adults, need to know how to work with the kids within their visual, within their visual-oriented world. And I talked about before, because of the wider field of view, deaf kids are very sensitive to the peripheral events or things that happen in the periphery, right? Okay, very sensitive to a wider field of vision. The good thing can be very adaptive when you think about like the hearing kid that may be watching more central visual events, but then they're also paying attention to other things through the ears, okay? So the deaf kids, what the research is showing is that they're really adapting without the sensitive auditory environment, without being able to sensibly tune into the auditory environment, that then the visual system really compensates and you have a wider field. So getting the peripheral vision good, but can also create more distractions, right? Adapting without the sensitive auditory environment, without being able to sensibly tune into the auditory environment, that then the visual system really compensates and you have a wider field. So getting the peripheral vision good, but can also create more distractions, right?
Question. Were you implying earlier that attending to things was a characteristic that parents teach their children as they would, learning empathy for other people, and some of the communication is being lost? That part of the issue with attention may be that they're not trained by their parents on how much time to pay attention to things?
I think so. I mean, I'm focusing this as more of that how the deaf brain may develop, more of like the biological. But you're right, that the visual attention strategies, it's also environmental too, right? I don't mean to just say that it's only, this is one of the larger examples of how it kind of relates to what the deaf brain may look like and how their visual system is. But those early joint attention, right, joint attention strategies that occur between baby and mother, there are a lot of those things also that can be environmental, that if they're not fully developed, that can also then have a negative impact on the kid's attention and the sustained attention, like concentrating, and then being able to communicate about things that are going on in their visual environment. So it's a good point. I mean, I think that's, yes, I think that, yeah, the attention is something biologically based, but then also environmentally based too. Yeah. And what a lot of the research has focused a lot on deaf parents and deaf kids, right? And what it's shown is that, and also some deaf teachers, deaf parents, deaf teachers, being very sensitive in how to work with the deaf students. And right here, this is a good example of kind of like that environmental influence, the zone of proximal development, scaffolding. You know those terms probably, right? That relates to like a social, cultural, theoretical perspective. Okay, which is really shown to have a lot of value in how to teach and help kids learn, and specifically deaf kids. And so the research has shown that deaf parents and teachers have been very skilled in knowing like if the kid is looking at something, trying to figure something out, then being able to use really good joint attention strategies and good back and forth strategies, like they're focusing on the object and then they're focusing on each other, then they're commenting on the object or action and then back on the object and back to each other. Really good patterns there. And I think there's a big value in that because the hearing world can learn from that. Good zone of proximal development and scaffolding, or ZPD, we can call it here for zone of proximal development, that we can learn from some of those good visual attention getting strategies and visual sustaining strategies to help with remembering things, learning things, okay? And that kind of relates to early on in life, obviously you would want mom, dad to be the ones to be there one-to-one and doing a lot of direct communication and exploration of things in the environment, and then slowly, when the kid knows it, then they slowly back off. That's what that, like scaffolding, it's kind of slowly backing off, and so that the kid becomes more independent. But if that doesn't happen, a lot of times you'll see then the educational system needs to pick that up. Hopefully you're going to be teaching the parents, having the parents either take sign classes, take communication classes to make sure that there is a good communication match in the home. But many times it's not until the kids are in school that they really start to get that ZPD and scaffolding really guided by their teachers. And where the teachers can do a lot either one-to-one with the kids or get a group activity where the kids learn from each other through communicating, right, about the problem and how to solve the problem, whether it's academic or social or whatever. So it's happening too late. So basically some of the new research is saying that hearing mothers and in some cases hearing teachers can learn to, or the hearing mothers can develop sign language competency and then show similar good communication strategies and development similar to hearing mothers with hearing children. Okay? So that's some of the new research there, which isn't probably new to you guys, right? You're good consumers of research too, right? So, again, like we talked about before, deaf and hard of hearing kids can be distracted by things that are way out here going on in the peripheral vision, and it can distract them to looking at that instead of like what's going on more in the central way. And with hearing kids, you tend to be more distracted by visually what's happening here, but then maybe more auditorily by what's happening like over here. Okay. But I mean, the good news is, there's new research, like that listed down here, that good visual attention getting and visual communication strategies can be learned to increase that development. So again, it's that mixture of biological, and then also having an environment that really focuses on good visual attention getting communication strategies that can be learned. Yeah, go ahead.
Like many times when you're teaching and you're animated and you're doing all this crazy stuff in the middle of the room and they find one little thing to look at that's totally, it just seems like they can't filter out the little things, but here you are, putting on a show, and yet they're not focused on attraction.
Yeah, well, I don't think that we have all the answers yet, but I'm going to get to it. What some of the research has shown, and I kind of lead that into some things to try that may be of value. It's the newness of the situation, like that the kids need to get accustomed to. They need to learn the environment. So if I'm back here and I kind of know everything that's going on, if you give them the wide field view, like from the start, then they kind of become habituated, or they understand, they know it, and they're not as distracted by when something pops up here or something pops up there. But what the research is showing is if like the kid is like up here, and there's a lot going on behind them, like other kids in other seats behind them and things, or like a door back here, something that they can't see, you can't expect. That's what we're just going to get into here. That really creates more distraction. So it's the predictability of the visual environment. That's what some of the new research is saying. Okay? So that's kind of it's interesting because we can look at the classrooms and maybe how we can kind of set them up in a way to make those visual environments more predictable. Does that make sense? Kind of like we'll get a little more into some of the other slides describing it, but that's it. It's they need to be able to have it all kind of in front of them, you know, and then they're less distracted by when something happens here and something happens there.
But then I see the opposite when they're on a field trip and you want them to, you know, be looking around and being like, where is my class? And they just keep going. You know? And it's like, what? In the classroom, you can't get them to stay focused in one place, and then in a field trip, when you want them to do that, to get their attention when they're way ahead of the group.
Yeah, it's tough. So it's almost like they're doing that. Yeah, it's like they're way up there, like trying to explore new and so
Are you going to talk about what some of those strategies are that you can talk to them?
Yeah, what some of the new research is saying. Okay. So the research is describing what's possible for the future. Okay, this really hasn't even been tested out as much. But so noted down here, computerized training, like to help really build those the attention skills. It's a big thing in the hearing world. Okay. And then there's been some discussion here about the value possibly for deaf, hard of hearing. Using computerized tests, it's been helpful with hearing kids with ADHD. Okay, trying to increase visual spatial working memory, like through like a computerized assessment, and like when the kids do well on it, then you keep like increasing the difficulty level. Okay, now the importance here, and I think this is why the deaf researchers have picked up and said, ooh, wow, this could be valuable, because we know that visual spatial working memory is really strong in deaf kids, okay? There's a lot of research showing that the spatial memory, being able to just see things over, like in a spatial array, a lot stronger than the sequential memory, you know, which you see a lot more in hearing kids. They're able to like auditory, like sequence things and remember things in order. But deaf kids really like, it's nice, can remember a lot more just spatially. Like just there's tons of different studies out there that's like, say if I was like finger spelling numbers one after the other, that the deaf kids will do a lot better if I put all the numbers up here. They'd remember them all a lot more than if I was just going one after the other in sequence, okay? And again, that kind of relates to the deaf brain. You know, that visual spatial memory part of the brain is really strongly developed with deaf and hard of hearing kids. So anyway, so that's a computerized assessment to try to train ADHD kids to increase that visual spatial memory. And that, as you see here with attention problems, attention is the first thing you need to get, right? And then concentration is what? It's just sustained attention. You need to attend for a long period of time. And you've got to have that for memory to happen, right? Okay? So that's why with ADHD kids, it's good to really, these different strategies to work on increasing their working memory. How much they can like work with at one time is really good. Because attention and concentration and memory kind of all three go like hand in hand. And parents have reported decreases in attention difficulties. So that is something that I know there's deaf researchers that are looking at applying that to deaf, hard of hearing kids in the future.
Does this computerized training does it help increase that sequential memory or no?
There are other computerized programs that may work on that more specifically. Yeah, but like this one was kind of just was working on the visual spatial working memory, and that's just one area that has application for more for our field because it's a stronger area. Yeah, but there are other computerized programs that will focus on different types of memory. Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of age range
Like elementary to middle, yeah, just that school age range. Okay, but again, they'd be able to handle more difficult things at the higher age range. Now, what's yeah?
Do any of those studies also look at children who are being medically treated for ADHD along with the computerized training?
Yeah, not that one in particular, but yes, others. Yeah, there's been a wealth of research and looking at that. Yeah, that's like at looking at what medication, how that plays a role too. And again, just kind of like how medication overall can show good success with kids with attention, concentration, and memory tasks. It's been successful. It's one of the successful interventions, but most successful when it goes hand in hand with some good, with good training like that. Okay, because medication doesn't teach the behaviors. That's something that we always talk about. It just medication can maybe, just be able to make the kid be able to increase the clarity of focus, but then you can use these programs a lot more effectively. Yeah.
Are there actual names of programs that are available that people have used and found successful that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, not right now, but yeah, I could make a list and stuff. I mean, you're aware of some of the assessments that are out there, right? Like the continuous performance test and test of variables of attention, things like that. Some of those assessments. Any familiar with some of those? Yeah. But then other intervention programs. Yeah, if you guys are really interested in that kind of stuff, yeah.
Computer software.
Yeah, it's a new area, and it really keeps expanding. Not only with the assessment area, but then with intervention programs, how to build. So, yeah, I'll have to write myself a note, remind myself. Yeah, if you're interested in some of those, I can maybe include some of that with the references. Oh, okay.